welcome to Talking Tech with Legal IT Insider. I'm your host, Caroline Hill, and today we're here to dive into Harvey's AI agents and shared spaces. So as you know, there's big news today about Harvey as well. But Harvey's agentic workflows, launched a year ago, have got the potential to reshape how legal teams automate multi-step tasks. Paired with Harvey's new shared spaces released in December, law firms and in-house teams are discovering new ways to collaborate. We're very much at the foothills of agentic AI, and as an industry, there's a lot to understand. And to help me think through and think about, where we are in terms of development and opportunity, and also to give us a demo I've got a great panel today. So I'm speaking with Harvey's legal innovation partner, Joe Cohen, legal engineer Millie Lehmann, and Russell Davies, who's global head of operations at Dentsu, to explore the work that Harvey and its clients are doing, both around AI agents and collaborative share spaces. So just to introduce my panel properly, so Millie is part of Harvey's London team, was one of the first 5 or so people in the London office. She was previously a disputes lawyer at White & Case. She's part of the legal engineering team. She's half Swedish, half Danish, and works with the Nordic market as well as UK law firms. Hi, Millie.
Hi, Caroline. Thanks so much for having me. And thanks for that very thorough introduction.
Thanks so much for joining me. I've got my teeth back in now, I can speak. Also based in London, Joe Cohen joined Harvey this year. His role is to help law firm leaders rethink how AI is shaping legal service delivery and law firm operations. He's worked in the legal innovation field for over a decade, most recently at Charles Russell's Speechleys, where he ran an in-depth Gen AI selection process that came out in Harvey's favour. Hi, Joe.
Good afternoon, Caroline. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being here. Last but very much not least, Russell is Global Head of Ops at Dentsu, as I said. He's got an in-house legal team. The Dentsu has an in-house legal team that has 250 lawyers, 300 people in the legal team in total. Russell runs what he refers as a small ops team of 7. I'm not sure that all legal ops people would agree that's small, but I suppose it's all relative. Dentsu was an early adopter of Harvey, and their group, GC Allison, is on its new advisory board. So it's really great to have you on, Russell, to share some of your perspectives. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, Caroline, and nice to meet everyone on the call and afterwards as well. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. So just to enable your chat, let us know if you've got questions. There's quite a lot of us, so I say that with some hesitancy, I'm not going to lie. But anything we don't get to in terms of questions, obviously the point of doing this live is we do want to make it interactive, so please do, I'm only just joking, please do share your questions. If we don't get to them, then we'll get to them afterwards. So just in terms of what's in store for you, we're going to look at a dive into what we're not going to go too basic, but let's face it, agentic AI within legal, it's still new. So what actually is agentic AI? What is it within the context of Harvey? Where Dentsu is in that journey, where the market is. I think we've got some really lovely sort of variety of experiences and viewpoints on the panel today. So that's great. We're going to be looking at shared spaces, what it is. Millie's going to give us a quick demo of that. And then we're going to be looking at how agentic AI and shared spaces converge, which I think is going to be really interesting, particularly shared spaces is growing. Let's dive into some scene setting. So when we were prepping for this call, we did say, look, we should talk about what is agentic AI and what it's not. So Joe, maybe you just kick us off. We don't want to, our audience are typically quite techie. We don't, perhaps need to go to the very basics, but actually I do think that there's still some degree of perhaps need to kind of set the scene, as it were.
Yeah, happy to. So I think if you look around the market, you will see kind of every AI provider talk about agentic, and I actually think it's a bit overdone. What is generative AI versus agentic systems? I think people just use them as the same terms, and I think it means that we don't fully appreciate the agentic any agentic setups. So let's maybe just kick this off by differentiating between what we might say is like a workflow Obviously, like, let's say you're using Harvey in the assistant, you're just chatting. That's not a workflow. That's not agentic, really. So let's try and differentiate between a workflow and an agentic system. So we could probably say a workflow is where the lawyer will be defining the goal up front. The workflow will probably ask you for confirmation of various things before it gets started on the task. The outcome of a workflow will probably be fairly predictable. It will follow a script, even though it might be a complex script, but it will follow a process. And the connectors for a workflow will probably be like fairly well defined, both in terms of like what they are and what the connectors can do. So that's like 5 things for a workflow. So on the flip side, we could say five points for an agentic system would be, well, it's probably going to infer the intent of what needs to be done without clear instruction. So that's different to a workflow. It will decide when it needs extra information, if at all. So normally a workflow will like stop you at the beginning and say, actually, hold on a second, I don't have information. So an agentic system might do that. It could do it at another point or not at all. The outcome, this is the key point, the outcome is or can be uncertain. It's not a workflow. A bit like, what's the outcome of this particular piece of legal work going to be? Well, we know like roughly what it'll be, but actually, who knows? It could go in one of different directions. Connectors. So we can obviously have connectors in agentic systems. I don't necessarily need to have defined connectors. It's a bit like saying, a lawyer working, like what systems do they work with? Well, they've got access to lots of different systems, and the outcome and the actions they could perform in then are fairly unlimited. So again, less certainty on the connectors. It has its own reasoning loop. So it's not necessarily following a script. And I think so there are kind of like concrete differential points between agentic systems and workflows. But there's another point, which is that actually usually what you'll see with an agentic orchestration system is that there will be multiple agents doing specific parts of that, run by an orchestration agent. So yeah, I think it's clear. I think we need to kind of clarify in our own minds when you're looking at different products, what are workflows, even if they're kind of complex workflows, and what are broader agentic systems that have, probably higher potential.
So Harvey says it's agentic by design. Does it always mean it's always agentic? Does it actually mean, because you've got you might have a workflow that has 10 steps, 3 connectors. You've said that's not agentic. So when Harvey talks about agentic AI, is it agentic AI?
So in Harvey, you can build workflows. And we can also build agentic systems. I've seen some of the more complex ones we've done. They're definitely agentic. Without a shadow of a doubt, that like some of the art of the possible within Harvey at the moment is actually quite mind blowing. So yeah, it's both. But again, that's, I think people, yes, you can build workflows, and that we've got thousands of workflows live across our clients, with tens of thousands of workflows live across our clients. But you don't to get benefit from Gems VR, you don't need to do workflows. You can do stuff in the Vault, in Assistant. So I think it's a kind of a maturity curve. Some things you want to chat, some things will be in a grid-based method, and then depends how repeatable the task is. It depends on the complexity of it. So I think there's lots of things, but yeah, I mean, some of the stuff that I've seen is really amazing.
I do think for a lot of the league, we'll come on to Russell actually in 1 second, but like, and it kind of neatly segues into this. But like, I feel like the legal industry, it's early days for us in terms of our comfort level. I feel like you've got to be honest with that, and that's not really a bad thing. I think that the days of having completely unsupervised agentic AI operating, I haven't seen a huge amount of that. So I think it's really useful that we're having this conversation now, particularly. I think so, Russell, if you can talk us through. So I know I don't want to actually maybe dive straight into agentic, because I know that it's also early days for you, but talk us through, you were an early adopter of Workflow Builder, and you've been doing a lot of work on workflows. So before we dive into your thoughts on agentic or where you're at with that, just talk us through where you're at in terms of the organization.
Sure, and to be honest, it's not a leap backwards. The thing, it's a spectrum we see, right? So fully agentic being one end, which Joe is referring to, what the long-term ambitions are. Certainly for some of our workflows, not all. I would hesitant to say, and the other end of the spectrum is some simple prompts that you can stitch together in your basic workflows within Harvey Workflow Builder. So the approach we've took. So what you're going to get from me today is not a polished case study, right? We're going to give you sort of real-time snapshot of what an in-house team is doing right now to sort of start to move along that spectrum in a controlled way, in an informed way. So we've just some stats on the board and where we're at within Dentsu. So we have 250 seats for Harvey. We made a decision quite early on. Well, actually, it was 9 months into sort of a more experimental POC phase. When we got the full seat cap up to 250, we made a decision very soon after that to democratize Workflow Builder. The idea being there that we'd pivoted away from a thought process which was perhaps entrenched in, maybe I'm at fault here, my old sort of IT consultancy background of build user cases, tie it to epics, you go through full dev test governance gates before you get into a production and publish them. I think that doesn't fit with the technology and how fast it's moving. So driven by our general counsel Alison Zollner, a decision was made very quickly to democratize Workflow Builder to all of our 250 users. Now, no doubt some on this call will be clutching their pearls at such a perilous and adventurous decision. But what we now focusing on is we think it's a really positive thing. We ran a workshop here in New York in January. There's about 30 of the Americas team converged, and it was a half-day workshop where we got into some proper old school whiteboards, post-it notes, and built out some MVPs and POCs through that process. And we're doing a similar thing in less than 6 days in EMEA, in London, in the London office, with around about 30 senior legal leads across EMEA joining us, but mostly virtually. But what we've seen from that is that we now have 29 published workflows within Dentsu. And we have a further 190 in our pipeline. We expect that to amplify. We track it every month. I can talk in a minute. We're actually using a co-pilot agent called Analysis to help us with some of that analysis. So we're using an AI agent to analyze how our AI agents in Harvey are performing. But what we're seeing there is, and we're analyzing that in such a way that going back to Joe's point, we're identifying the candidates, the categories of workflows that lend themselves to more autonomy, ones that use reference data on a regular basis. But there is governance around this. If it's using reference data and calling external sources, who updates that, who owns that? So we're figuring it out as we go along and building that methodology. But we do believe the path towards that agentic end journey is the muscle memory we're building through developing our workflows, analyzing which lends themselves to an enterprise scale and where there's better value add. So yeah, hopefully that's a taster, Caroline, of where we're at right now. And we've got weird and wonderful methods and graphs that we're working through at the minute to analyze how best to hothouse and promote those workflows that lend themselves to an enterprise and an autonomous endpoint.
So when you talk about, so is that how you just, I know it's too much to dive into, but how do you bring it from experiment to deployment? And is this, obviously I suppose it depends on the workflow. There's lots of factors involved, but you have to share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so we are publishing workflows fairly aggressively. We don't put too much governance on that publication point. We leave that, we push that down to our local legal team. So we've got a naming convention. They do their own dev, test, and prod when they've done some peer reviews, light touch governance locally. So peer reviews of those workflows and the output. And then once they come to my admin team, we publish, and then we analyze them once they've been published. So intentionally, we're not a regulated industry at Dentsu, and it is our legal team's the only ones using those workflows at the minute. We trust them. They're responsible individuals. So we publish fairly aggressively with little governance. But the analysis we're doing now is starting to really almost retrospectively then see where we can enhance them for enterprise use, right? So in the past, and we build branching out. So whereas it might have just related to the Americas market in the past, we can branch it out and then point it to different reference data. Sorry, way too technical for this call, but you get the idea.
Yeah. And then
it's
it's interesting. It's sorry to interrupt you. And it's interesting because you said then that sort of the next progression is these cross-functional discussions around what autonomous agents would look like. That's your sort of move towards agentic AI. So talk us through, and there are some questions. I don't know if anyone wants to jump in the chat. I'm not ignoring you, and I think hopefully we're going to come to some of the specific examples, etc. But by all means, please keep posting in the chat. But so talk me through. So this is your next stage in the evolution, moving towards agentic AI, is looking at what autonomous agents would look like. Talk me through the methodology right now, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so we plot all of our published. Well, we've got 190 in the backlog as well, but the ones that we published, the 29, we have, for those of you who've seen the Gartner Magic Quadrant, a similar approach, right? We have a x-axis, which is the ones that lend themselves towards scale. So is it just local for a local practice area, perhaps a local data protection team, or is it something that we can scale all the way across the enterprise? So what are we looking at the minute? Response to RFPs. We're a B2B business, so we have lots of client requests coming through all the time. So response to RFPs, that's something that we can scale across the enterprise. So there's a couple of workflows there that we're looking in different ways. I would say we're hesitant on full autonomy. You know, we are not doing that. I'm not going to. We are not that polished case studies I've said, but the approach and the method to get there is on the analysis. What does it do? What's the output? How risky is that output? How many touch points does it have? How many reference data points does it call? Legal and lawyer. I'm not a trained lawyer, but my peers are naturally a bit hesitant towards that route. So I think the way to build that is a bit more governance. I think that's an enabler, not a break. Understanding what they do and the output. But we've started to have conversations. In fact, I'm meeting our head of innovation in about an hour to talk about the use of MCP, Model Context Protocol, and also something I need to learn about. I'm not going to pretend to be an authority on that. Hopefully I'll learn more by the end of the day, and also using Copilot Studio for some of that orchestration. But what I would say for legal teams that are trying to make that leap is don't do it alone. You know, there's cross-functional teams that are all developing their own ways of orchestrating and heading towards that methodology of what autonomy looks like. We don't know what that is yet, so I'm working cross-functionally.
Awesome, thank you. I'm going to come on to talk to Millie about, because you've got that broad market view. There's questions in the chat. By all means, to the panel, if you feel like jumping in, please don't wait for me, because people are asking for examples. If anybody wants to sort of jump in at this point, you know, I think we might cover this, but please do jump in. Does anyone want to jump in, or should we just go straight to Millie just for now? People are asking for examples of MVPs and some examples. This may be something that we can follow up afterwards, or Millie, maybe you can jump in on that as well when you can give us. So you've got this broad, you've been been with Harvey for a long time, and work with a lot of different customers, so perhaps you could give us that broader perspective in terms of where you see the market at in terms of temperature, etc. And if you want to jump in on the questions as well, please do.
Yeah, so in terms of where the market's at, a lot of what I'm going to say mirrors quite reassuringly, I think, what Russell was saying. So in general, it is still spectrum. But I'd say broadly, we're definitely seeing a shift in focus away from the kind of basic generic input-output queries and assistant that I was seeing a lot of, you know, when I started 18 months ago, which is donkey's years in AI terms, and seeing a move towards kind of more meaningful building out of workflows. So I think the move is sort of from experimentation, which is maybe where we were sort of 18 months ago, to more meaningful implementation. And how can we actually kind of encode firm best practices and know-how into workflows, distribute them across teams, enforce kind of consistency of outputs, and kind of enable everyone to have access to these workflows as well. So Joe mentioned this earlier. He said thousands of workflows. The actual stat I have here, so Harvey customers have built 25,000 plus custom workflows already, which I think really speaks to that. So it's definitely one of the quickest growing kind of parts of the platform. And I think this also reflects kind of an increasing expectation in the market that outputs are going to be consistent, auditable, client shareable, and not just kind of the story isn't just one-off productivity wins. It's more kind of sustained and about consistent client service. And just speaking a bit more about kind of where exactly users are in the workflow building stage, I'd say most organizations that we work with are at sort of what I'd call guided agent stage. So they use Workflow Builder, that's been talked about a few times already, to kind of chain inputs, prompts, and logic together into kind of repeatable flows. And those might be used across things like DD. That's a really big area that we see people building workflows for. So drafting sections of DD reports, for example, disputes, classic examples there, close to my heart, things like chronologies, building, witness interview packs, questions, cross-examination outlines, things like that, regulatory work, so horizon scanning, often with kind of embedded templates and precedents to sort of make sure that each run outputs in a way that is closer to how that particular firm thinks and also closer to how they kind of like to structure their final outputs. And then there's a more kind of advanced subset of users who are using things like deep analysis and also embedding multiple knowledge sources throughout their workflows. And when I say knowledge sources, I mean kind of searching external databases. So that could be kind of the open web, or it could be things like the Eurlex database, for example. And then there is that kind of smaller but growing group that is starting to think about kind of experimenting more meaningfully with things like scheduled workflows. So that is sort of a workflow. Let's take horizon scanning again. I think it's a really good example where you can just set it to run sort of on a weekly cadence, and then no one actually has to click into the workflow and initiate it. It will just run autonomously, and you'll receive kind of an email update every week with kind of key things that week that you need to focus on, maybe new regulation and things like that. So there is that kind of subset of users who are getting more advanced as well. I think overall workflows in general are kind of trending towards more agentic behavior, of course. So there'll be kind of fewer touch points required to get you from beginning to end. And of course, the scheduling point is really important. So that adds a lot of autonomy where you don't have to actually initiate it manually each and every time. And I think it's really interesting looking at it also from the angle of shared spaces, which we're going to be talking about more later. But as shared spaces kind of starts to mature, these agents are increasingly going to become kind of more space aware. So running specifically inside client or matter spaces, and kind of eventually becoming able to auto select the right vaults and tools or documents for that particular workflow, and kind of surfacing drafts and tables and alerts to both sides who have access to that shared space. So I think the future is looking very exciting. I'd say the realistic picture now is that a lot of people are kind of dipping their toes in and starting to experiment, which is great.
Millie, I'd say just to add to that, scheduling is the best way to start. Right, it's your first steps, I think, in autonomy. I think that the other trigger points would be it gets a bit more complex, right? Do you have a legal intake front door? Can you connect to that? What are people asking the legal teams? How do you feed that information in? But if you have some kind of ticketing system, I think that's the logical next step for some of those other trigger points.
100%. And I was going to say this earlier, but just a quick one to add. You will see this maybe when we look at the platform in a bit, but we've rebranded Workflow Builder to Agent Builder. And that's really like, we're not trying to claim, right now that it's wholly agentic, but it is moving in that direction. And I think scheduling is a really important example of that. So it's more of a kind of picture of intent and where the path is going. And that's a really great example, Russell. I actually have a workflow that's quite similar. So kind of triage workflow where non-legal teams can upload an NDA and they can get kind of quick advice on whether they need to escalate to legal for review. So more than happy to kind of show an example to bring that to life if we have time for it later on.
Joe,
I just want to okay, so like one of the questions from Rach in the chat was like the difference in workflow and agentic. So the way that one of the ways, let's try and differentiate it. And I haven't seen one of these like properly in production now, but I have seen very good builds of it. Is let's do like an M&A example, right? So I think one of the main differences, let's say, between a complex workflow where in the M&A due diligence context at the moment would be like per document clause extraction, analysis, reporting, that kind of thing. But the agentic orchestration will allow us to look at the data room as a collective, right? Because then you get some potentially interesting unknown domino effects. Like, so for example, this liability clause in this contract is fine, but actually it impacts on another document. So you're looking at cumulative obligations. And if you have different agents working together, you can actually find these things, superimposing external market information, regulatory activity back into the orchestrator, filtering down back into the deal itself, looking at like operational documents of, let's say, the target company. This policy is fine, but actually once you look at the policies as a collective, actually that's a red flag. They actually got some operational deficiencies in the target company. In terms of the deal workflow, in terms of the deal cascade itself, material adverse change stuff. So, for deals they've got, let's say, signing and completion gaps, looking at events that actually happen, looking at news feeds and stuff like that, things actually can be affecting the deal, filtering into the orchestrator in real time, also provides useful information to the legal team. And actually, let's say you've got a drafting agent actually drafting the SPA sitting under the orchestrator, taking the information that is found, at the collective of the data room, flowing down into the SPA drafting and the warranties and disclosure drafting as well. So I think there's like, we've got an interesting diagram that kind of lays it all out in different phases, but actually I think it's not faster DD, it's better, more colored DD in that particular context. So I think this is like, you'll see these more and more in production. But I think at the moment that's how we see it, and that's how we're kind of thinking about it, a little bit behind the scenes there.
I think, thank you for that, Joe. And I think that goes some way to, hopefully that goes some way to answering. There's questions in the Q&A. If there's anything further, please do just post it in the chat for me. That would be awesome. If there's anything that you want us to dive into, I'm quite keen to. We've got 45 minutes, and I'm quite keen to make sure that we get onto shared spaces, and get Millie to do the demo. Part of me just thinks let's just dive in, but let's just talk about let's just tell everybody what is shared spaces. Millie, what is shared spaces for everybody, and then let's dive into the demo, because people are quite keen to see it, I think.
Sure. So shared spaces is effectively a kind of small gated version of the Harvey platform, where you have kind of all the same functionality, but it's shared with a specific external audience. So that will be people outside of your workspace. So that could be people in the same company. If they don't have Harvey licenses, you can invite them into your shared space, and you can collaborate across the same data sets. You can look at the same outputs. You can, ask the same questions. And that could be, for example, a legal team and a finance team, or a compliance team, or something like that. The other angle that we see it from is law firms and clients, of course. So enabling them to kind of collaborate together in these secure spaces, cut the kind of review time, enable the feedback loop to be shorter, and again, work across the same data sets. And we see that typically, in the context of transactions. So again, like, I hate to talk about DD again, but kind of DD type reviews, where time is of the essence, and you can kind of directly share in a secure environment, without needing to worry about that lag time.
Do you just before you dive in, would people say, like, perhaps I'm going to direct this to Joe, is this, we have talked for years about collaboration spaces works, like we've talked about, the legal profession lives on collaboration. Just before you dive in, they're saying that Russell's in a padded cell. Sorry, stop distracting. But is it vastly different, would you say, to what we've had before? And we don't need to name other suppliers or vendors, but just in terms of the experience for lawyers who might be listening, going, well, I've done this for a while. Is it different?
Yeah, and the user experience is different as well, to be fair. I mean, I was literally just, as you said that, I was thinking, like, do not name other providers. Yeah, I think like the ability, like just the complexity that's on offer through let's say workflows, access via shared spaces, is just like night and day to, I think, what people will be used to. But Millie will show that in real time. So may as well just let her have a crack at it. Yeah.
Before we do that, Millie, I'll give you your Dentsu experience. So we've just started the journey, as you know, at Dentsu. So we've established our first external shared space with Herbert Smith Freehills last week.
I want to pause you because I want people to see what it's like, and then I want to come back to you.
All right, cool. Okay, yeah, sorry.
Then people can visualize what it's like, and then
Great.
and then we'll come back. I want to come back to that. It's important.
Yeah.
Russell, you can also kind of chip in wherever you like. Because we spoke about this yesterday, and I actually built this kind of based on what Russell was saying, and what I'm hearing a lot from, obviously, in-house is an increasingly important part of the clients that we service. And Russell raised a really interesting example of how Dentsu's been using it. that is also reflective of what I'm seeing with a lot of other in-house clients. So that is the example I mentioned a second ago about using it kind of internally, but with people who might not have Harvey licenses. So within the same company, different teams. And that's the example I built here for you. I appreciate, a lot of people on this call might not have seen the Harvey platform, but a lot of the functionality you can see here are kind of pieces of the Harvey platform brought into this secure space where you can control kind of the levels of sharing with the external parties that you invite in. And you can see here I've just chosen kind of a hypothetical name for this one, so Nexus Media Group, internal, because this is shared with teams inside this media company. And you can see here we have like a few different categories of data that are in this shared space. First up here we have some vaults, and in Harvey language, a vault is basically kind of a library where you can store up to 100,000 documents at once and kind of query across them in lots of different ways. And you can see here I have a few different data sets. I have some NDAs. I have vendor and production contracts and also some content licenses. So stored there, you can see you have the option to just add anything you like from your Harvey instance if you want to kind of share that with other people in the shared space. Maybe you want to get their eyes on it. Maybe if it's a vault full of precedents or templates that you want everyone to benefit from that kind of best practice library, you can add it to the shared space as well. Here we have artifacts, so basically outputs created in Harvey and shared with this group. And here we have things like this, what we call review tables, again in Harvey speak, which is basically a kind of mapping across up to 10,000 contracts that extracts certain key terms. So this has been created across these NDAs here, and you can see certain key terms have been extracted. So a really easy way for those non-legal teams to really quickly go in and get a view as to kind of what are our standard positions, what have we agreed to recently. You can kind of use filtering to see which are the relevant kind of precedents for you to look at and kind of get an idea of what the kind of standard position should be. And then down here we have what we call tools, and that is where you will find both our playbooks, and those are basically, for those of you who don't know, it's a certain type of contract review. It's where you have a playbook that kind of sets out your standard and fallback positions in relation to a certain type of contract. So that could be something like an NDA, and you can use those to review inside the Harvey for Word add-in. Here we have imagined that, let's say, the legal team has created this playbook and pushed it out to those non-legal teams so that they can do that type of quick first level review using these playbooks directly within Word to generate kind of first pass markups. And then here I have an example of a workflow that I mentioned earlier. So this one is called third-party NDA triage. It basically enables, again, those non-legal teams to just upload NDAs and have a quick assessment according to kind of embedded guidelines in that workflow constructed by the legal team. And again, get a quick view as to whether they should escalate this NDA to the legal team for review or whether it's kind of fine, good to go. So what you're seeing here is basically a lot of data that's kind of shared in this secure and controlled way across different teams within the same organization. Where it is a law firm and company collaboration, it will look exactly the same, but it will be, a different kind of set of use cases. So it might be that DD example I talked about earlier. It might also be kind of co-counsel working on the same matter. So where you're working on kind of a big dispute, you're reviewing the same data set, or, on the same due diligence exercise, and you have many co-counsels across different jurisdictions. You might invite them all into a shared space to just streamline that collaboration. And I feel like I should let Russell speak, but I'm also very happy to show you this workflow. We've been talking a lot about workflows, and I think if people are interested, I can show you what it looks like.
Up to you. Do you want to see the workflow first, Russell, or do you want to dive in?
Yeah, show the workflow first.
Show the workflow
Thanks,
first.
Russell. I'll be quick. I just want everyone to kind of understand what we're talking about, because we've banged on a lot about workflows without showing you. So this is what we call the back end. The way to build these, it looks complicated, but effectively you just tell Harvey what you want. So you can prompt in natural language and you'll get an output that looks something like this. And here on the right, we have the message the user sees. So this is my NDA triage one. So the user is told in this one to upload their NDA. The next section is the user being asked to input certain information about this particular NDA so that Harvey can kind of make the determination. And then we have the prompt block. So these are basically prompts that have been hard coded into this workflow. They will run on the back end each time someone clicks into it. And this is where we see kind of the consistency element and the benefit of, users who maybe don't know how to use AI, are not that good at prompting, are not lawyers. They can benefit from these prompts that have been hard coded here. And this one asks Harvey to just review the incoming NDA against this triage checklist that we've embedded here. So with Harvey, you can embed these reference documents. It could be a template, could be a checklist like this one. And I mentioned you can embed knowledge sources just to show you this is where you do that. So you can embed kind of searches of these external databases. And finally, model selector. So of course, for every step of the workflow, you can choose which model you want to use. And then down here, we've got kind of Harvey's analysis. It will output its view. So it will give the NDA risk rating. And then it will be asked, the user will be asked, how do you want to proceed? Do you want to escalate for red flag review or not? And there's a conditional branch here. So if the user says yes, escalate, Harvey will generate an escalation brief, again, based on this embedded template, just so we can ensure it's consistent across the board. If the user says no, you'll get this approval memo instead, again, based on a template. So just a very quick overview. When you actually run it, it looks like this. So if I click on test, you'll see what we call the front end, so what the user sees. And you'll see it's a lot more kind of streamlined. And Russell, I will let you speak now.
Yeah,
Or Caroline.
Sorry, actually, so I'm just conscious that we've got a live webinar and I'm ignoring everybody. Like I'm gonna give you all like 1 minute to answer all these questions, and then Russ, we're gonna come on to HSF. Right. So are there plans to have the search limit increase beyond 10,000 files?
So per vault we can have 100,000 files. I don't know what is meant exactly by search limit. When I joined the company though, it was 10,000. So it was 10,000. So it's increasing very quickly, and I'm sure it's going to increase again soon. I don't have an exact roadmap date in mind, but
Okay.
watch this space.
I think it was 1,000 before that, Millie. So
yeah, so it does. I mean, things move fast.
Can the vault also accommodate the structured data like database CRM? I don't know if we can come back to this.
Yeah, so I might have to.
Let's come back to that. That's fine. And then just confirming we could share something like this third-party NDA triage with individuals inside our company who do not have the Harvey access / licenses.
So the way that you can share with people without licenses is primarily through shared spaces, and we offer kind of free of charge guest licenses for that purpose. But they will need access to the platform either by license or through shared spaces.
Okay.
Just on the CRM, just as to kind of answer that question, it's not, you wouldn't do it necessarily via a vault. It would be, so like, for example, Aderant connects into Harvey from a PMS perspective. So it's not a vault per se, but yes, external database information can be queried via Harvey. Yeah.
I'm going to come back to questions. I apologize, Russ. Hopefully we'll be able to get to more questions, but if we can't, then I apologize and we'll come back to them afterwards. But I'm really keen to talk about the work you're doing, Russell. So if you could just share about HSF.
Yeah, so the two aspects, it's early days, right? So it's not a polished case study, but we do have successfully set up that shared workspace with HSF. The beauty of it, we can, as Millie said, we have a shared knowledge base. Right, we're not engaging with law firms and asking them to curate our own data for us or having to put a lot of work into that. So we can build those knowledge bases in Vault very, very quickly. And going back to the previous point about CRM, you wouldn't necessarily replace your master data, your underlying systems. But what you can do is easily transfer lots of data into Harvey, either via an upload or via pointing it to a SharePoint. Right, so we've done something very similar for our CLM. We've got 20,000 contracts. They're available. They're available for HSF if we need them to. They don't need to look at all of them, but we can segment that and create a knowledge base that we can share with outside counsel like HSF. And the other beauty of it is, and it's something that we all need to think about engaging with our outside counsel panels, is we'd like to reuse some of the workflows. Right, so I think the key thing is we're not throwing away that work. At the end of the matter, we want to retain those workflows, perhaps democratize them, publish them internally. Maybe it's not for everyone, but maybe for a subset. So for me, it's about, that's the sort of real value there. And you get visibility, right? So I can go into that space at any time and see who's working on what. It's not a bright flag or a full end-to-end system of exactly what they're doing for deliverables, but you can see the activity, you can see the workflows, and you can see the knowledge bases that people are working through. But it's about that collaboration piece, right? Sharing the knowledge base and making sure you can work on the workflows together. They can help us develop our own muscle memory on how to do it. A lot of the law firms have had this technology longer than in-house for sure. So yeah, it really is, shared space is the right terminology there. But to be determined, and then the other aspect of it, and it's been touched upon, it's a way for our business users outside of our in-house team, outside of L&C team, to also interact with the technology. So we can have shared spaces. We were discussing with our UK&I finance and commercial compliance team last week about creating a shared space for them to interact on as too. So it really does open up that sort of internal as well as external space.
Yeah, 100%. In terms of time saving, I mean, it was really good that Millie gave that specific example. Is that resonant? It's the sort of thing that you're looking at in terms of her demo.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So there's a follow-up question there.
Yeah.
Was that workflow agentic? And so I think the answer is essentially yes and no. Probably more no. Yes, in a way that the Harvey engine itself is agentic. So one prompt in Harvey ends up being like over 100 prompts behind the scenes, fed to different types of different areas of its expertise. So in a way, most things in Harvey are agentic, but if we go back to my definition right at the beginning, no, that is non-orchestrated workflow as I kind of had it defined. When we eventually publish videos of which we probably will, some of the orchestration agents that we've got, then you'll be absolutely in no doubt that they are agentic.
Yeah. Have we touched on we're sort of coming towards time, unfortunately, which is annoying. I mean, I'm fascinated by the work you're doing, Russell, across the whole, not just with outside firms, but across the business. You know, obviously, I've written about legal for a long time, and one of the huge areas of frustration is that there's only so much capacity, despite the fact that your legal team is huge.
Sure.
I did wonder with the shared spaces, you know, how you sort of, in terms of the governance and making sure that only certain people can see what. That was something that occurred to me as you were showing it. I don't know if we've got time. And the other thing that we were going to touch on was making sure that we explained enough the connection between agentic AI and shared spaces. I don't know if there's anything that we haven't talked about that you wanted to add, but perhaps you might want to just jump in on that.
I would say we're not looking at yet shared spaces for fully deterministic agents. So I think that we'll have to work more with Joe and others to see how we best apply that to Dentsu. So yeah, that's not. I wouldn't want to paint the false impression that we're doing that yet. It's something we'd like to do. I'd also say there's orchestration agents that are coming down the pipeline. I understand, Joe, within the Harvey UI, but there's Copilot Studio, there's Agent Builder for those of you that got Microsoft Copilot as well. I would suggest having a look at that and working with your internal IT and innovation teams if you're so lucky to have them. And I would say, just on that final point on orchestrate, you know, shared spaces does take some governance. It does take some operations people to look after it. These things, you know, you've got to invite members. You've got to create knowledge bases. This is not it's not display. I'm going to do it. Obviously, I'm going to do an advert and billing for having a good legal operations team. But if it's not a legal ops team, there's operation procedures that need to be followed to manage that, which is new, right? We didn't have to worry about this 6 months ago, so it does displace a lot of the work. But you still need to consider what that governance looks like.
Yeah. Do we want to? So final takeaway. So I think there's an interest in. I think we might have covered for you at the moment. It's not agentic, but there was a question around how might shared spaces unlock greater value potential from agentic capabilities in 12 months' time. I feel like that might be a nice wrapper. You know, perhaps a nice takeaway. Joe, do you want to jump in on that, or Millie maybe?
Go for it, Millie.
I think I kind of touched on it earlier, but I think just that piece around being kind of more matter aware. So agents that kind of live inside these shared spaces and can kind of pick up automatically the right vaults, knowledge bases, workflows, playbooks for that relationship, instead of the user having to kind of give the context each time. So I think that's going to become increasingly kind of the surface on which all these agents operate. And this concept of kind of memory in Harvey is something that is a big focus for the company in the coming period. So just making sure, I mean, a lot of people that use Harvey, they don't want it to train on their data, but they do want it to kind of learn how they work. So I think building out these kind of contained spaces where you can kind of securely have Harvey remember that context, and then have agents that can sort of recognize that and just autonomously do tasks is kind of where we're heading.
I feel like there's so much more we could talk about. I'm so grateful for your time. I'm going to give you like any final takeaways that you wanted to share, Joe. I didn't get to come to you. So if you were to sort of share one thing from this webinar, what would it be?
Yeah, what we've covered quite a lot, haven't we? Yeah, I mean, look, it's a very exciting space to be in. That's the truth of it. I think just going back to one of Russell's points, it's probably like more boring operational point. But the ethical side of it, when we're looking at memory, is actually very challenging, and that's why we're kind of happy to partner with Intap on that. I manage SPM. In order to make it work properly, you need to be a scaled organization, and that's one of the benefits of being with Harvey is that we have that kind of operational scale to think about. It's very complex to say that some lawyers don't have access to this particular matter, and therefore it can't form part of their memory and experience in the platform. Regardless of can they access this shared space or not, is like probably slightly easier. But yeah, and these are the challenges that we're having to tackle at the moment. Is what does it mean when memory of the experience of the platform is slightly different for different people? So but yeah, really interesting space at the moment.
Thank you. I'm going to have to stop you because we've run out of time and we need to let everyone go. I really appreciate you making the time. This is a really exciting space, evidenced by the number of people that wanted to join us today. And I'm grateful for the time and running through. Thank you for the demo. Thank you for sharing the client experience. And thank you, Joe, for sharing the benefit of your experience and joined this year. I can't wait to see what happens over the next 12 months. Thanks to everybody for listening in and for all your questions. We'll get back to them after this webinar and we'll be sharing the recording with you. So thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Caroline. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Caroline.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.